Good morning, everybody.
Yes, it is, ladies and gentlemen. Father Hines and his great band playing for you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's Great South Side. Get ready now for 30 minutes of Super Jive in the Father Hines style. Yes.
Welcome to some Super Jive in the Father Hines style here on Mysterious Chicago. Morning, Rose, and morning, Mona.
Could this be? Ah, it's a Limehouse Blues.
All right. Morning, Sarah, Pat, Karen, Gladys, Lisa, Betsy, Dina, Laura, and Robert over on YouTube. Hey, Andrea, Nancy, Dave, and Steven. Morning, Chris, Jay, and John. Hey, Timothy. Morning, Barbara. Tony, Aviva. Hey, Martin. Hey, Mary. Hey, Becky. Hey, Diane and Sarah. Hey, Lisa. Good day, Suzanne. Hey, Susan, Dory, Dave and Barb, Jordana, Grace, Suzette, and Edwina. And hey, Paula and Michelle. Hey, Gina. Morning, Trish. Oh, glad you had a good time. Hey, Carol. I thought yesterday was the best in-person tour I've done yet this cycle. Hey, Audrey. Partly just because the weather was cooperating. Hey, Ann. Morning, Bridget and Mary Jo. Hey, Diane. Hey, Daryl and Ramona. Ooh, that sounds good. Apple cobbler. I'll go for some apple cobbler. Hey, Karen and Chip and Julie. Hey, Eleanor. Hey, Timberley. Hey, Heidi. Morning, Elizabeth. Hey, Alicia. Welcome along, everybody. Hey, Marcia. I should point out today is the True Crime in Chicago Cemeteries tour. Apparently, I accidentally listed next week's Graceland and Rosehill expansion for today, in the midst of many typos on Eventbrite that I had today. Hey, Amy. Hey, Chuck. Hey, Amy. Hey, Jeff. Morning, Rebecca. Hey, JD. Hey, Marley. And Candace. Hey, Cher. Morning, Kendra. Morning, Robert. I managed to stay dry on my walk this morning. Just started to drizzle right as I was getting back. Oh, hey, Kathy. I don't think I'm connected to those particular seltzers. Hey, Karen. Alright, get well soon, Amy. Chuck, no, I'm just having tea this morning. Hey, is Bob out there? Did we all see Bob's tattoo? I know it's still in progress, like the missing letter and stuff, but it's looking great. I can't believe he got that. Morning, Cindy. Hey, Kat. Hey, Julie. Hey, Susan and Kathleen. So I think I may be missing some of the alerts. Hey, Sharon over on YouTube. The tattoo is of Mysterious Chicago. Let me share this thing. Pretty sure I got it up on here. Alright, good morning. Anybody I missed while I was doing that? Hey, Kendra. Oh, yeah, I know they're still working on this, but check this out. Ah! That's a difficult responsibility on my part. I better keep on not sucking, huh? Miles. Hey, here's the boy. Miles has been playing obsessively with this dangly toy that Layla got him. Brought it over to me 3 times yesterday. Morning, Susan. Morning, Libby. Hey, Kendra. Hey, Grace. Yeah, I got this tour ready just in time that I had a little bit of time to play with Miles earlier, so he's still hovering around his cat dancer toy. Hey, Linda. Hey, Toby. Suzanne, yeah, we've got some travel coming up, but after we're done with the travel, then, yeah, we're definitely getting a kitten. But please stop offering me cats, you guys. It won't be yet. I appreciate it. But yeah, we're definitely eager to. And I think Miles definitely needs someone else to play with. Besides just me. Hey, Gene. Hey, Roy. So next month, probably. Morning, Patricia. Hey, Rob. I'm going to close out the mail, so hopefully nobody's got any tech support questions. Morning, David. Patty, that is correct. That's what we've always done, is just gone to pause and saw which cat seemed to like us. Morning, Lisa. Hey, Vicky. Hey, Tricia. Buenos dias, Ivory. Jeff, Charlotte had cancer. She passed away about a month or 2 ago. Unfortunately, it's been very sad. And I think Miles has definitely been lonely without her. Hey, Paxton. Is it raining that hard in the Loop? It's not raining too much up in Rogers Park. At least last time I looked outside. Morning, Teresa. Morning, Joanne. Hey, Kathy. Yeah, we're kind of timing things. We got some travel coming up, so we don't want to get a kitten and then take off out of town. It's all right, Jeff. Yeah, she was a wonderful cat. Morning, Bob.
Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
Hey, Wexley. Hey, no one over there on YouTube. I can stand some rain here. It's humid inside the apartment. I'm going to go mess with the air conditioner really quick. There we go. Hola, Miguel. Hey, Michelle. Welcome back. Hey, Kelly. Morning, Mom. Hey, Denise. Hey, Deb. Good morning, Amy. Morning, Karen. Hey, Heather in Kansas City. Yeah, my friends in Des Moines were posting pictures of the hail that they got yesterday, or the day before. Ah, Jeff, that's a horror story. Any temperature over 75 is too hot for me. Yesterday, we actually had good weather for a Graceland tour. That's very unusual. Once again, those of you, today is True Crime in Chicago Cemeteries. It briefly looked as though next week's tour was today. Next week's tour is an expanded edition of Graceland and Rosehill, the stuff I can't normally hit on the walking tours. But there will also be a little bit of Graceland and Rosehill today. I think I got some, I got some Graceland in here. Morning, Sherry. We'll give it just another minute or so for everybody to get logged on. Hey, Bart. Morning, sunshine. Happy birthday to Sam, Jeff. Hey, Kristen, I almost sent you a message. Hey, we got a good one today. But, you know, come back in like September, October, November. Those are the days. Those are really the times to go. The leaves about hit their peak in first week in November or so. Hey, Dad. Watching the tour while shopping the Aldi. Suzanne, Mount Carmel Beach kind of tricky. It's the same thing with, like, I've been thinking of doing one at Calvary. I think I got enough stuff at Calvary within walking distance of each other. But it's a matter of whether the Archdiocese is letting people do tours there and stuff. Morning, Octavio. Everybody's out running errands this morning. All right, I think it's a good time to hit pause. And Miles, do not climb my butt, please. That hurts. But all right, everybody, I think it is time that we go ahead and get started. Welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Salzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for about 15 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, Hh Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, and Speaking Ill of the Dead, Jerks in Chicago History. So, once again, welcome along, everybody. Today we are going to talk about true crime tales in Chicago cemeteries. Now, this is one of the tours that I really just can't do in person. We've started to do in-person tours again once a week on Saturdays, but I couldn't possibly do this one because this takes place in several cemeteries from throughout the Chicagoland area. But I'm going to start with one that we talked about on Find a Grave Friday the other day, but I've never included it on one of the tours. There's not a whole lot of things in this cemetery, but it's the closest one to my house. This is St. Henry's Cemetery. This actually has the distinction of being the only real graveyard in Chicago if you go by a strict definition of that term. Now, officially, if you really want to get picky, it's only a graveyard if it's attached to a church. Personally, I'm not that picky about it. If somebody wants to call Graceland or Rosehill graveyards, personally, I'm fine with it. But if you really want to get, picky about specific definitions of things, if you want to be that pedantic, it's only a graveyard if it's attached to a church. It's the kind of pedantic nonsense that, frankly, up with which I shall not put. But this is the only one in Chicago, formed in 1871, right about the time that they stopped allowing churchyards in Chicago. Most of the other ones that had been built around churches, people had been moved to larger Catholic cemeteries like Calvary, which is about a mile and a half due north of right here. This is currently, the church is now called Blessed Aloysius. In the old days, it was St. Henry's, but usually they just referred to it as the Rogers Park Catholic Church, even though it's actually west of Ridge Avenue, which some people would say means it technically counts as West Ridge. There are some terrific names in this cemetery. My favorite is Margaretha Sinner. That's an awesome name. And right near her is Margaretha Kill. And Margaretha Kill is there with Maria Kill, Anthony Kill, and there's someone named Mary Kill and Elizabeth Kill. I always hoped that Mary's middle name has got to be something that starts with an F, Mary F. Kill. You could actually recruit yourself a pretty good roller derby zombie team out of St. Henry's Cemetery. But right next to Anton Kill, past Mary Kill and Elizabeth Kill, on whom I can't help linger, you come to Henry Minnow, who was probably the first murder victim in the Rogers Park area. And once again, it was well west of Ridge Avenue, so technically West Ridge or West Rogers Park. But 1886, he owned a farm up in the vicinity of an Indian Boundary Park, about Toohey and Western. But one day he went out for a night of drinking at one of the many illegal speakeasies that dotted the area. Now, the Rogers Park vicinity in the 1880s was mostly a lot of farmland still, with just dotted stores and churches here and there. Officially, they were dry towns, but there seemed to have been a lot of illegal taverns operating, including one that was operated by Henry's brother-in-law. So he went out drinking and playing pool one night. The next morning, a neighbor, the sexton at the cemetery manager, was walking along the road about where Western and Toohey is now, and saw a dead body lying by the side of the road. He turned it over, and it was Henry Minnow. Ran off to the Minnow property, said, "Is your father home?" And his teenage son said, "No, he didn't come back last night. I guess he's at my uncle's. Let me go get him." At which point this guy said, "No, don't bother. He's dead." Not the most sensitive way he could have handled this, honestly. But looking around the body, they found that he hadn't really been carrying a lot of money. There was hard to figure out any reason that somebody might have murdered him. Nearby, they found some bloodstains, they found a rock that had been used as a murder weapon, and they found a handkerchief with the initials torn off. The suspicion fell on a guy by the name of Jacob, who was a German immigrant who had just moved to the city a few months before and was living with a woman that he had met on the ship. They hadn't gotten married yet, but they were talking about it. She was able to identify the handkerchief as his, so everybody kind of assumed that it must have been him. He disappeared and was never seen again. Now, there's another scenario here that it also could have been. It could have been that he was coming home from the same bar, saw the body lying there, rolled it over, started dabbing at it with the handkerchief, and then thought, "Oh no, everybody's going to think that I did it." So he panicked and ran off and was not seen again. But officially, he's still really the only suspect they ever had. They were looking for him, so it was 10 days before they even got around to a coroner's inquest. But that was the first murder victim in Rogers Park, one of the most forgotten crimes in the city now. When it first happened, Henry Minnow was a wealthy enough farmer that it made the news all the way into the New York Times. But after the coroner's inquest, it just kind of dropped off of the map completely. And while we're up here on the north side, it's another place that I'm thinking about trying to get permission to do some in-person ones would be Bohemian National Cemetery. This one's kind of spread out. I've kind of come up with a good walking tour route. This one may be too far away from the gates to do in person, so we'll just do it here. Young woman of the 1920s by the name of Wanda Stoppa. Now, Wanda Stoppa was a young woman. Do I have a better shot here? Yeah. I have a couple of different shots of her. That's her, that was her target, but underneath her. Wanda Stoppa was one of the only women lawyers operating in Chicago in the early 1920s. She was the youngest assistant district attorney we've had, but her legal career tends to get exaggerated in retellings of the story. Her duties weren't really much beyond what a law clerk would have been doing at the time. But when she was still living with her family while she was working, but when her family took a trip back to Poland, she stayed behind and started sampling the bohemian lifestyle in Chicago, hanging out in art galleries and tea houses that were generally speakeasies on the side. In the process of that, she married a guy by the name of Count Ted Glasgow, who claimed to be a count from Russia, though he was really pretty much flat broke at the time. And Wanda was very casual about the marriage. She told her parents, well, marriage is just a piece of paper, and continued having affairs with other people, including an advertising executive here in Chicago whom she really fell in love with. This guy encouraged her to really focus on that bohemian lifestyle instead. Become an artist model. Who needs another lawyer? Eventually, she started falling a little harder for him than he had anticipated, and he wound up paying for her to move to New York and find a way into the New York bohemian style, partly because that advertising exec, Mr. Smith, was already married to a woman who was generally went by the name of Doodles. Wanda started writing increasingly desperate letters to this advertising executive saying, please, I will do whatever it takes. I'm very sorry this is happening. I'm sorry to be such a bother, but if you'll please take me, I'll just be here when you need me. But eventually she got tired of waiting, came back to Chicago with a pistol and a box of cyanide-laced chocolates. So with this box of cyanide-laced chocolates, she went to the house. The paramour was out, but Doodles was in. And she said, are you going to divorce your husband so I can have him? And she just kind of laughed, at which point Wanda pulled out a pistol. She did not shoot Doodles, she ended up shooting a gardener instead, then ran off in a panic to Detroit, leading to a big manhunt. This was a major story for a while there in 1924. Eventually, they found her in a Detroit area hotel room where she had eaten the cyanide-laced chocolates herself, committing suicide. This was how popular the story was. This was the scene outside of her house at the wake. That was a very popular story at the time. It's amazing that there aren't more pictures of her than there are, to be honest. I see some things that some people are saying that it's freezing today. Best I can really recommend is it's freezing for some people, but not others. Best I can really recommend is try refreshing. It seems to be running smooth for about half of the people. That's particularly unusual. On my end, the stream seems to be pretty solid. So I'm going to pause for just a second here. It could be some of this because of the storm someplace. Or Kristen successfully made her sacrifice. She could have done it before the last Graceland tour she was on for better weather. So I'll pause for just a second because I don't really know why it's working for some people and not others today. About half the people are saying it's perfect, other people are saying it's freezing, it's skipping, it's repeating. That's bizarre. Best I can say, if you guys are in an area where it is skipping or freezing, best I can say is try to refresh your feed, try to refresh your app. That's usually what's going to happen. But in the meantime, I'm just going to have to move on. So yeah, you can also try over on youtube.com/Adam Seltzer or twitch.tv/Adam Chicago. Yes, we'll pause here for station identification. This is Mysterious Chicago Broadcasting Network. Seems to be fine for about, I'd say, 2/3 of the people. The others, since it seems to be working here, it seems, and for most people, I don't really know what the problem could be. But we'll move on a bit. Elsewhere in Bohemian National Cemetery is one that I don't think gets featured on quite enough tours. This is the grave of the family of a guy by the name of Martin Vrozel. Now, one day in the early 1900s, Martin Vrozel, who owned a milk business in what is now Pilsen, took sick and died. Then several of his daughters died. And then his wife died. Blame was placed on a fortune teller the family had hired by the name of Herman Billick. Now, Herman Billick was by all accounts a fraud, and people began to suspect that he was using arsenic to poison the family, possibly because he was having an affair with Martin's wife. There were other things saying that maybe he wanted to get the family fortune, wanted to get the money. So several of the bodies were disinterred from this spot in Bohemian National and found to be absolutely loaded with arsenic. Jerry, a son of the family, testified in court that Herman had been giving them all of these powders. Herman was convicted and sentenced to be hanged, but then, shortly thereafter, Jerry reversed his testimony. He said that he had only said that stuff because the authorities, the police officer, said, you have to say these things or we're going to pin all of these murders on you. So he panicked and said what he was supposed to. Eventually, Herman's sentence was commuted to life in prison. Then, about 10 years later, he was even pardoned completely and found innocent and set free. Though he only lived about 4 months before he passed away of natural causes. His health deteriorated a lot in prison. As for who actually killed the rest of the family, most of the modern suspicion has fallen on a woman named Emma Vrossel, one of the daughters of the family, the one who did not die, though her husband did. And her husband's father did. But there's exactly why they didn't pin it on her is kind of complicated. There's a terrific book about this case called Poisoned by Steve Shukus. This one you can get on Amazon or wherever ebooks are sold. Steve dug into the case and found that really they managed to pin it on Herman mainly because corrupt police and corrupt officials, it was just easier for them to pin it on him. Especially in those days, women were never convicted of murder in Chicago in the early 1900s, no matter how much evidence there was. Mostly, this was a case of police misconduct at its worst. Well, not at its worst. These things come up a lot in these sort of stories. From here, we're going to zip over to Calvary Cemetery. Once again, sorry for those of you it's freezing for. It's working for half the people and half the not. That's very annoying. Hey, Kendra on YouTube. This is the tomb of Carter Harrison, which has recently been cleaned up. It looks brand new right now. Behind him, of course, is Lavinia Lane, possibly a witch, but that's a whole other story. Carter Harrison was mayor of Chicago in the 1880s and early 1890s through a couple of non-consecutive terms. Pause this here. Carter was the mayor during the World's Fair that we had in 1893. He was known as a very laissez-faire kind of guy. When he was up for re-election in the build-up to the World's Fair, the Chicago Journal put out this terrific article called Thieves on the Run. Thugs flocking to Chicago from every quarter. Carter Harrison's nomination, the primary cause. Criminals alive to the prospects of a wide-open town. Police powerless against the lawless crowds. Their point here was that if we re-elect Carter Harrison, then the city will be wide open. Every thief, every pickpocket, every murderer will know that Chicago is safe for them and come here on the run to take over the World's Fair. They politely did not gloat. Well, first of all, the very day that was published, there was also, the Chicago Tribune published their first article about H.H. Holmes and the hidden rooms in his building on 63rd Street. But they managed not to gloat when Carter Harrison was assassinated at the end of the World's Fair in 1893. There was a guy by the name of Patrick Prendergast. Patrick Prendergast was... If he had murdered anybody else, he almost certainly would have been found insane. The jail physician said that he suffered from schizophrenia. Now, he had it in his head that as mayor, Carter Harrison had planned to make him corporation counsel because of a plan he had to elevate railroad crossings. Now, in those days, if you drive around Chicago now, you notice most of the time you're going underneath the metro tracks. At the time, they were all grade level, and they were death traps. People got killed crossing the streets all the time. So, in the process of this, there was a big argument about how should we elevate these railroad tracks and make it safer. It was going to take a lot of paperwork, and it was going to take a lot of money. Prendergast claimed that he had a plan to do it for free. But when pressed about this plan, he could never actually remember any of the details of it. But he still thought that Carter Harrison was going to make him corporation counsel. And when he declines to do that, he came into his house on Ashland, which is no longer standing. I talk about it sometimes on the Darker Side of Taylor Street tour. It was within viewing distance of the place where they used to hang criminals back when they did public executions. Originally, it was built for the Honore family. Bertha Palmer would have grown up in this house, but eventually sold to the Harrisons. Came into here and just shot him to death. And Prendergast himself is buried at Calvary Cemetery. It's kind of unusual for someone to be hanged to have a marked grave. That's really very unusual. About 100 people were hanged in Chicago over the years. I can only think of a couple. This, off the top of my head, this is about the only one I can think of that has a marked grave for P.T. Prendergast. And again, if it had been anybody else that he shot, almost anybody else, they probably would have found him insane. Even the jail physician said he was definitely insane. But since it was the mayor, they hanged him for it. Though a lot of people were very mad about it at the time. And even more so when the story came out about Prendergast's cellmate at the jail. who is one of the hanged men buried in an unmarked grave over on the other side of Calvary Cemetery here. This was a guy by the name of Buff Higgins. There had been a murder in Buff Higgins' neighborhood. Buff Higgins had been involved in lots of little petty larceny things, so when they were trying to find somebody to pin this murder on, they happened to arrest Buff Higgins. They couldn't find anybody else. So, having arrested him, according to Judge Goggins, they locked him into a cell, naked, and left him there without food or water for a couple of days. Then they came in with a whole pint of whiskey and said, "Here, you can drink this." Once they did, they put a piece of paper in front of him saying, "Okay, here's your alibi statement, just sign this and you'll be free to go." Now, he was drunk and illiterate to begin with, so he definitely couldn't have known that what they had really put in front of him was a confession. But he signed it, and on the basis of the fact that he signed that confession, he was sentenced to be hanged. When he was being hanged, other prisoners were heard to be shouting, "Hang the governor, hang the governor, hang the sheriff." People were pretty mad about this one, and they hadn't even heard the full extent of what had happened to him. But unfortunately, these things happen over and over. Of the 100 or so people that they hanged, I would estimate that probably 20% of them were innocent, and another 30% through legal maneuverings never should have ended up being hanged, at least. Even if we take for granted that the death penalty is okay, which is a whole different question. In fact, not too far away from him is another guy who is one of 3 people referred to as the trunk murderers, a guy by the name of Giovanni Azzari. Now, this was the 1880s over in one of the Little Italy neighborhoods. There were several at the time. 3 guys were accused of having murdered a guy for his money, then shoving him into a trunk that they then mailed to Pittsburgh. This is the kind of thing that happened now and then. Bodies would show up in barrels or trunks every now and then. They always seemed to manage to trace it back. At the time, it was kind of a tradition that Italian gentlemen would shave each other. So the story was that they brought this guy into their place, say, "Hey, we're going to shave each other." Then when it was his turn, instead of shaving him, they just slit his throat. So he was represented in court by Kate Kane Rossi, who later made a name for herself by beating up a cop with her umbrella. She was the only woman lawyer operating in Chicago at the time, and it was just difficult for these guys to get a lawyer at all. Nobody really wanted to represent them, even though the evidence against them was, as usual, remarkably sketchy. They were found guilty and sentenced to hang. He's buried here in an unmarked grave. This is another one where there is a pretty good book out. Elizabeth Dale's The Chicago Trunk Murder, Law and Justice at the Turn of the Century. And she makes a fairly convincing case that these guys were not really convinced based on evidence. They were convinced based on being Italian mostly. But there's just story after story of this, like the cops at the turn of the century Chicago. There was a review of the department came through one time saying the police of Chicago are piano movers, anything but police officers. In fact, back at Rosehill Cemetery, wrong button. Right at the edge of what is sometimes called the 7th grade section, is the grave of a guy by the name of John J. Badenoch, who served as chief of police of Chicago for a while in the mid-1890s, despite having really no experience whatsoever in what he was doing. He was a flour and feed dealer by trade. But when George Swift was elected mayor, one of his duties was to select a new police chief. Badenoch was at the meeting advocating for somebody else, and the new mayor said, "Well, that guy's all right from about here on down. I want you to be the chief." Now, at the time, it was known that the Chicago police were just so famously corrupt that nobody objected to somebody who had no idea what he was doing being made the chief, the idea being that they had to bring in somebody from outside the department if they had any hope of ever cleaning it up. But he ended up being the chief of police about 3 months after his inauguration during the investigation of the Hh Holmes Castle building here in Chicago. Now, the Hh Holmes Building, it was a 3-story building down on 63rd Street. Holmes was arrested for having faked his best friend's death, but then they found a couple of his friend's children's bodies scattered throughout North America. They found out that he had murdered his best friend, and then remembered that this guy had a building back in Chicago that was supposed to be full of hidden rooms and chambers. Most of what we think we know about it now comes more than anything else from this New York World article from 1895, where they had a diagram of the second floor with rooms like the room of the 3 corpses, the black closet, the death shaft, the maze. Some of this is realistic, more of it kind of came from the New York world's imagination, but also the police just didn't run a very good investigation of the place. They were just poking around blind, they didn't bring in any experts at all, they let reporters poke around and dig all they wanted. But among the people who were involved in that investigation, over at Mount Olivet Cemetery, I kind of stumbled on this guy completely by accident. I couldn't believe it turned out to be him. I just saw, oh, Fitzpatrick, like Inspector Fitzpatrick. There are lots of Fitzpatricks at Mount Olivet, but this one did in fact turn out to be Detective Fitzpatrick, who was the inspector at the time and really in charge of the investigation. But one other guy from the investigation ended up acquitting himself a little bit better over the years, and that was, let me move stuff around, a guy by the name of Detective Sergeant John Norton, who would go on to be with the police for another almost 5 decades after this. He was the chief of detectives when they were going after Al Capone. He is buried over at All Saints Cemetery now. He was an interesting guy. He almost had like a Columbo vibe to him. In the Holmes investigation, he didn't do much better than anybody else did, but he got better over the years with years and years of practice. For instance, over at Rosehill Cemetery, a little off the route that I normally go on walking, and only partly because I can never find this one again when I'm looking for it. It's a kind of tricky one to find. But this is a story that you might know from our ghost tours. Ruth Ann Wanderer. Now, Ruth Ann Wanderer was the wife of the young bride of Carl Wanderer. Carl Wanderer was a guy, shortly after Ruth became pregnant, he came up to a drifter on Madison Street and said, "Hey buddy, you gotta help me out. See, I'm in the doghouse with my wife. She's about to have a baby and doesn't think that I'm good enough to be a dad. So here's what I'm thinking. If you'll come up and pretend to mug us tomorrow so I can punch you in the face and look like a hero, I'll give you $10. Drifter agreed to the deal, loaned him a pistol to make it all look more authentic. Next day, he and his wife were walking home from the movies. The drifter jumped out from behind the bushes. Wanderer shot the drifter to death, then turned to the side and shot his wife to death, too. The whole thing had all been a big setup. Now, his exact motivation for it, there's a few different stories going around. None of them were ever entirely convincing. But one way or the other, he didn't want to be a dad, and he decided the best thing to do was kill his wife and blame it all on the drifter. So, here's Detective Norton as he looked in the 1920s. This is a few years after the Wanderer case, but he was generally given credit for being the one who solved this. Really just by doing kind of a Columbo thing. He's like, okay, so Carl, that's a great story. There's just one more thing I don't understand. Now, you say this drifter just jumped out from behind the bushes, but you also say that this was his pistol. Don't you think it's weird that a drifter would have a pistol this expensive? And Wanderer's like, oh, well, you know, how would I know? It's like, and don't you also think it's weird that they were just, that's one serial number off from your gun, and it's the exact same model? And at this point, Wanderer finally got flustered and said, oh, geez, well, I don't know what I was thinking saying he had a gun. I'm sorry. I pulled out 2 guns, and he took one away from me. At which point, okay, there's one more thing I don't understand. How many people did you think you were going to have to shoot walking home from the movies? So, by and by, Wanderer confessed. Ruth is buried over here at Graceland Cemetery, not too far away from their house, which was in Lincoln Square. Now, elsewhere at Graceland, there's another one I'll just touch on briefly. Next week's tour is going to be the Graceland and Rosehill stuff that I normally have to leave off just because it's too far off of the walking tour route. But I'll include this one today. This is an unmarked grave for the family of Henry Meyer, who, depending on how you measure things, might have been Chicago's first serial killer. Operating throughout the early 1880s, he was a doctor down in what is now the Old Town neighborhood. This is his family plot where his wife was buried after she was poisoned. She was poisoned along with Henry's girlfriend's husband. Henry and Ida were a couple. He was in love with an Ida who was married to another Henry. It can get a little bit challenging to figure out who's what in all of this. But this is the lot record of it. We see Ida buried here. Then there are several children, a few of which Henry was also accused of murdering. He murdered Ida so that he could get her out of the way so he could marry a different Ida. Most of the rest of his killings seemed to be for insurance money. After he tired of the second wife, he tried to kill her, didn't succeed, just managed to get a regular divorce instead, went off and married another woman, and started convincing her to marry other guys that he could then kill for the insurance money. They did this over and over. Finally, he was captured in New York, put on trial there, had to go on trial twice because one of the jurors went insane in the middle of the trial, and did some time in Sing Sing, but then eventually seemed to have gotten out, went right back to his old neighborhood in Chicago, and even though by then he was a very old man, he started hooking up with young women and trying to convince them to get back into the same business of marrying rich guys so that he could kill them for the insurance money. A letter that he wrote to one of them survived, including the phrase, "We evildoers love night and hate daylight." He was captured, he was convicted, he was sent to Joliet, but it seems to have been a very minor story at the time. I'm still trying to figure out whatever happened to him, but presumably he died in prison. It's difficult partly because Henry C. Meyer was not an uncommon name. In fact, he wasn't even the only Henry C. Meyer who was born the same year he was, in the same part of Germany that he was, who was then living in Chicago in the 1880s. Makes things a little bit tricky. How am I doing on time? I think it's time we switch straight on up to the gangsters. And we'll start just down the way a little bit from Detective Fitzpatrick. If you see my car over there, my car is parked right at Fitzpatrick. But then back over here is Mike Mcdonald, the real first gambling king of Chicago. We had a lot of those over the years, but Mike Mcdonald was also deeply involved in politics. He was the first guy to really blend corruption, crime, and politics here in Chicago. At one point he was getting raided. His first wife shot one of the cops, somehow got off the hook through all the various pull. Then he ended up remarrying again, married to a woman who herself was quite a bit younger, fell in love with an even younger man, and then ended up killing him. He was an artist. At one point they got into a fight after years and years of having an affair, and she ended up shooting him to death. And McDonald was able to use his influence once again to get her off the hook, but the stress of it all finally killed him. And this is one of the mausoleums, though, that you can see right into. I think he's the only one in there. But his work paved the way for other gambling kingpins slash politicians, such as back at Calvary Cemetery, Bathhouse John Coughlin. One of the most absolutely goofy characters in Chicago history. He was co-alderman of the First Ward. Back in those days, they had 2 alderpersons per ward, 2 alder people. Now, Bathhouse John was the guy that you went to. If you had murdered someone and needed to get off the hook, he's the guy you would go to pay off. He got a lot of people out of trouble, but also continued in public service for decades, and people generally thought of him as harmless just because he was so goofy. In particular, he was known for his songwriting. His big hit was a song called Dear Midnight of Love, but he also wrote such songs as Why'd They Make Lake Michigan So Wide, So Awful Wide, She Sleeps by the Side of a Drainage Canal, Ode to a Bowl of Soup, that was a good one. Later a reporter claimed that he had written all of them, but this was in an era when reporters were taking credit for practically everything that had ever happened in the mid-20th century. By the time he was an old man, the rest of the city council was having him promote things like contest to see who could see the first robin of spring, or promoting Straw Hat Day. He was really into promoting Straw Hat Day. Here he is practicing putting on his straw hat like a big boy. But one of the other people working alongside him, the precinct captain in the First Ward, was Big Jim Colosimo, who is in a mausoleum of his own down at Oakwood Cemetery. And I love showing this one. We'll make our way down here a little bit. Once again, if you guys are experiencing freezing, people are finding that over on Twitch and YouTube, it seems to be working better. Apparently, it's some kind of back-end problem on Facebook. It's working for most people, but not everybody. Eleanor, I think we have done Ode to a Bowl of Soup on one of the first-time travel pub crawls, on which Bathhouse John was a special guest. He came to see us over at Big Jim Colosimo's place. Big Jim operated a cafe near 22nd and Wabash, just down the block from where Capone would have the Four Deuces Club. But he was kind of the vice lord of the 1910s. If you ran a numbers racket or a gambling ring or a house of ill repute around someplace, you were probably paying off Big Jim. But then in 1920, as liquor became illegal, word was that since he had gotten remarried, he didn't want the city to get involved in bootleg liquor. That made him a target for absolutely everybody, and he was shot to death in his cafe. Now, once again, Detective Sergeant John W. Norton was on the case. He went and interviewed his new bride, Dale Winter, and said, "Now, Mrs. Colosimo, do you suspect anyone?" And she said, "I should say that I suspect everyone." But even though Big Jim was a crime lord, he was a very popular guy. His funeral was a massive affair. There's Bathhouse John, who sang Ave Maria at the funeral. And he was interred in this massive mausoleum here. And we can actually, this is another one that we can see right inside of. We're going tomb snooping. What do you want to be when you grow up? Tomb snooper. Well, here's what I always love to point out about this is James Colosimo, it says right there, 1877 to 1919. He was killed in 1920. There's no mystery about this. We've got the death certificate, we've got all the newspaper articles from May of 1920. This is just strictly a typo. I always kind of imagine the guy doing the carving, the tongue just hanging slightly out of his mouth. Oh, crap. Mr. Gladstone, I've done it again. I guess they probably figured, well, who's ever actually going to see it? Little knowing that here we are 101 years later, still showing pictures and still talking about it. Now, with him out of the way, guys like John Torrio just got together and said, okay, we are definitely going to be doing bootleg liquor here in Chicago. So, what we're going to do is divide the city up into territories. You take yours, we'll take ours. There's plenty of money for everybody, no reason to fight. Now, eventually, though, they decided they did want to start getting in fights, but even then, they were prevented from doing so because a guy named Mike Merlot insisted on no violence. Now we're out at Mount Carmel Cemetery, which is where most of the gang figures actually seem to be buried today. Mike Merlot was, in the early 1920s, the head of the Union Siciliana, which officially was a civic organization for the aid and benefit of Sicilian Americans who had moved to Chicago, but by the mid-1920s, it was such a powerful organization that it had really become just kind of a front for the mob. Mike Merlot was involved in a lot of crime cases over the years. There's a guy named Sam Cardinella, who was in an unmarked grave at Mount Olivet Cemetery, where Detective Fitzpatrick is. When he was accused of running a band of criminals and murderers, Merlot organized a petition to try to get him out. Down to the bottom there is Frank Arnitto, better known as Frank the Enforcer Nitty. Now, as of in 1924, before this mausoleum had been built, John Torrio, the head of the South Side mob, really wanted to go ahead and kill Dino Banyan, the head of the North Side mob. But Merlot said no, but then Mike Merlot died. Now, he just died of natural causes, but for some, hereafter, heads of the Union Siciliana had a very short life expectancy. But this is the crowd outside of his place for the funeral. He lived up in the Lincoln Park area. But as soon as he was out of the way, Torrio said, okay, he's gone, we can start shooting now, we got to get this O'Banion guy out of the way. So he sent a few people into the flower shop where O'Banion worked as his day job. They acted like they were there to buy flowers for Merlot's funeral, but instead they shook his hand, pulled back, stuck a gun in his guts, and fired several times. So that was Dino Banyan, the head of the North Side mob, who is now not very far away from Merlot over at Mount Carmel Cemetery. This is O'Banion himself. He got his start as a singing waiter over in what is now the Kerryman. It was actually said to be his singing voice that attracted the attention of other gangsters. But also he'd probably been working as a newspaper slugger before that, a thing where newspapers would hire kind of like the farm team kids for the mob to beat up other newspaper carriers. But here's him being taken out of the place inside of a body bag. The people who were thought to have done the shooting were another gang that officially worked for Torrio over in the Little Italy neighborhood known as the Jenna Brothers, who are also at Mount Carmel Cemetery. This is Tony Jenna, Angelo Jenna, Mike Jenna. Over the course of 1925, all of these guys were shot down, and the rest of the Jenna brothers fled back to Sicily for a while. By the time a lot of the gangsters blamed them for the shooting starting up. By the time Mike Jenna was shot, we're not even really sure which gang was responsible for that. Or when Tony was shot, who was shot over on Grand Avenue, right where the pest control place is now. So, at the interment of Mike Jenna, there was an interesting comment overheard by Genevieve Forbes Herrick. It was the Chicago Tribune's ace crime reporter, and somebody at the interment here at the cemetery was heard to say, "There's Mike and Dean and Jenna." Like Mike Merlot, Dino Banyan, and Jenna. "When Judgment Day comes and them 3 graves are open, there'll be hell to pay in this cemetery." And this was just the start. There were lots more gangsters coming to Mount Carmel Cemetery over the next few years. For instance, to get revenge on John Torrio for the killing of Dino Banyan, all the people who had taken over, Jaime Weiss, Bugs Moran, and Vinny the Schemer Drucci, attacked John Torrio outside of his house. He was shot in the face, but didn't die. Just happened to be smart enough to retire at that point, turn everything over to his lieutenant, a kid named Al Capone. So, to get revenge on the Northsiders for the attack on Torrio, they organized a hit on Jaime Weiss, who is also in Mount Carmel Cemetery. And he was shot right across the street from O'Banyan's old flower shop, which was the site of Holy Name Cathedral. They're currently building the new One Chicago building on the exact site where it was. Right across the street is Holy Name. Some of the tour companies in the city have been insisting for years that this is a bullet hole from when Jaime Weiss was shot. It's not. The church hates hearing that. This was actually for a lighting tube for a message board plaque that used to be up there. But buses still go by there and point it out all the time. There are buildings in Chicago where you can still see damage from mob hits of the 20s, but that's not one of them. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the cemetery is one of the guys who took over with Jaime Weiss out of the way, Vinny the Schemer Drucci, buried here under his real name. And Vinny the Schemer was called that because he was always coming up with wild ideas like, let's go to London and rob the crown jewels, let's run one of our guys for mayor, let me dress up like a priest and so O'Banyan can beat me up and everybody will say, "Oh man, don't mess with that O'Banyan guy. I saw him beating up a priest on Michigan Boulevard." But he was shot by the police while crossing a bridge one election day when they were just rounding up all of the gangsters. The gangsters in those days were really known for interfering with elections. And of course, elsewhere in Mount Carmel, around the edge is perhaps the most famous of all the gangster graves. Just to make sure that if Judgment Day comes and them tombs open up, there'll be hell to pay, is the Capone family. Now, he was initially buried at Mount Olivet, but kind of moved under intense secrecy sometime in the 1950s. But there he is, Alfonse Capone, the guy who took over for John Torrio, operated in Chicago, was really only in charge in Chicago for 4 or 5 years and spent most of that time in Miami or in jail in Philadelphia. But here's Al Capone at the ripe old age of 25. Here's Al at the age of 30, well younger than I am now. Now, elsewhere in the plot with him is much of the rest of the family, including Ralph Capone. Now, Ralph Capone's place was raided after a couple of the early shootings, and the guy in charge of doing the raiding was, once again, Detective Sergeant John W. Norton. Now, he found that they were using, rifles as curtain rods. There were hidden compartments all over the place. I've always wondered if he, while he was digging through that, he flashed back to 20 years before, 30 years before then. I always got to imagine these people in the 1920s were saying, I always feel like 1890 was just 10 years ago. But I always got to wonder if he flashed back to digging around in the Hh Holmes place looking for hidden compartments and secret panels and everything, just like he had back here. But alright everybody, I'm going to move once just a little ways outside of the Chicagoland area to close with my favorite grave before I run out of time here. Out in Garden Prairie Cemetery, someplace outside of Rockford, a little country graveyard in the middle of the farms. A lot of the older graves are totally illegible. But then right in the middle, there's this one for Daniel Stott that I just love. It's got a murder mystery right on the gravestone. Daniel Stott died June 1881, poisoned by his wife and Dr. Cream. Dr. Thomas Neal Cream was a doctor working on Madison Street here in Chicago. Now, he had already been arrested once. A patient on whom he was trying to perform an abortion died on the table. Now, years later, when he was in London, he would be caught performing abortions on young women and then giving them painkillers loaded with way too much strychnine, which would kill them. And he seems to have done that once to a woman here in Chicago as well. A woman named Alice Montgomery died of poisoned painkillers shortly after an abortion. But in this case, what happened was he had met a Garden Prairie woman who was married to a guy named Daniel Stott. They decided they wanted to run away together, and he decided the best thing to do was to get Daniel Stott out of the way. So he gave her some poison to administer to Daniel, and it worked, obviously. But then Daniel's wife got nervous and had confessed to everything immediately. Cream ended up doing a stint in Joliet until his brother managed to convince him to just send him back to the UK, where he got right back to work. But alright, those are some true crime tales from Chicago's cemeteries. I want to go ahead and plug some of the upcoming events. Thursday night, we are doing one of my favorites. I've only done it once so far, but it's a really fascinating one. The 1864 Chicago Insurrection, when Confederate forces conspired to break prisoners out of Camp Douglas, the Civil War prison camp, take over Chicago, and plunge the city and the country into chaos on election night 1864. It's an incredible story. That'll be another virtual tour. Saturday is in-person day. Next Saturday is my first Rosehill Cemetery walking tour since 2019. I've always been particularly proud of my Rosehill tour. But both the Rosehill and Graceland tours, I can't get to everything on a tour. Rosehill in particular is a lot of ground to cover. So on Sunday, we will supplement these recent in-person tours with Graceland and Rosehill expanded with stories that just never seem to make it onto the walking tours, usually just because they're just too far of a walk to get to. And of course, we are doing mini tours every day. If you want in-person tickets, there are a few left for the Rosehill one. Just go to MysteriousChicago.com, and we do morning mini tours here every single day. Now, should you need a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, t-shirt, hoodie, coffee mug, etc., head to cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago. They will hook you up with everything you see here and a whole lot more. And with that, everybody, we will turn Earl Father Hines on. Sorry about Facebook being in such rare form today. But here is the Earl. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I want this to sound a little more lively. Amy, I've never done an Evidence of Hits tour because most of them are in private houses. So I've shown a couple of them on the morning mini tours, but I wouldn't want to take a crowd up to stare at somebody's house. Oh yeah, and you all saw Bob's tattoo, right? Now, this is still in progress. The light colors, the whites and the grays weren't taking quite well. And I see they still got to add the eye and Mysterious there. But can you believe this? Bob got a Mysterious Chicago tattoo. I'm a little overwhelmed by this. I better continue not sucking. Yeah, sorry about Facebook stopping for people. It seems to have happened about half of the time. Near as I can tell here, my broadcast meter has always been green the entire time. I haven't noticed any shutdowns, and every time people were saying it was freezing, other people were saying that it wasn't. So it's something on Facebook's end. Thank you, Kirk. Eleanor, yeah, basically it was just kind of considered a rule not to attack at a funeral. In fact, you would usually send flowers. I wonder if it's to do with all of the storms going here. What gangster is buried in Waldheim? There's a few of them, I think. Waldheim is so hard to find stuff in, though. It's tricky because Forest Home also used to be called Waldheim. It's German for Forest Home. Who wrote the Poison book I mentioned? Let me look the guy's name up. That was by Steve Shukus. Shukis. Excellent take on the Billick case. Anyone famous buried under the land which is now Lincoln Park along the lakefront? Yeah, portions of Lincoln Park from about midway into the Gold Coast up to about where the cottages and the Lincoln Park petting zoo is now. Famous would be a stretch for some of them. Yeah, there were some notable people buried there. About whatever it takes. Thanks, Susan. Now, flowers were just protocol. For some of these gangster funerals, there were literally truckloads and truckloads of flowers. Hey, Linda. I see Branson made it to space. Somebody just sent me a text about it. Donna, it depends on municipality. However, how would they know? But generally, I would think I don't believe you're supposed to, but I imagine people do. What you can't do is, like, pour them into drinking water that goes to the drinking water. But people get really mad hearing about that. Well, 50 miles into space was a long way on the last Starfighter. Thanks, Kathy. I can think of a lot of people I wouldn't mind shooting into space. Not just leaving there.
From the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's south side, where the couples are gaily dancing here in the cool atmosphere to this jive of Earl Father High. Yeah, but now comes Leroy Harris.
Quite a few.
And now it can be told.
So I did get confirmed yesterday, speaking of rich guys though, Richard Dreyhaus of Chicago, one that everybody loved, he was just a big kid, is going to be getting a mausoleum at Graceland. It's probably going to take a long time, so you got to design it, you got to find the stone, which is really tricky these days. But It'll be the first new mausoleum at Graceland in years. Yeah, we'll just take the Fool Killer in his space. That way we can also get back. When did streets have both north and south in Chicago? When they put up the grid, they decided that everything would be north or south. North, south, east, or west. But yeah, Dreyhouse liked fancy stuff. He was really into preserving old architecture. So we kind of assumed when he saw the little grave marker there for him that that's probably just temporary. His death was rather unexpected. Ava, that's known to happen with me. The lip sync issues are definitely a thing. Like when I'm watching Mandy on Effing Chicago, often the video's a little bit ahead or behind of the audio. And the Atom didn't like him, so we shot him into space.
Number 9, add to it a little of the effervescent swing of Father Hines, and you have Beside a Moonlit Street.
It always freezes with me making a weird face, I know that. It's always when they get pictures of me in like the Alley of Death and Mutilation too. I'm always like... Explain Clark Street? It goes along a natural ridge, that's why it curves off where it does. Have a good day, Eleanor. Oh yeah, we were there yesterday. We were working on getting the reflecting pool in front of Marshall Field's grave actually working. I always say it's full of the tears of his workers. But they've been doing some restoration stuff. The Carter Harrison marker looks brand new right now, where Reverend Thomas Eddy right next to it also does. And while walking around yesterday, I also noticed the Kranz Mausoleum has been fixed up. Gene, yeah, should be. I don't know when the last mausoleum was even built around here. There's one built on spec at Rosehill. That's just in the last few years. They've got it for sale there. Well, you know, Dreyhouse operated the Dreyhouse Museum, a couple of mansions around the Gold Coast area that are all really elaborate. This is the kind of guy who would throw himself James Bond-themed birthday parties for when he was turning 70. Oh, you know it's going to be something cool. Now, a lot of the angled streets, the reason they're not on the grid is that they were already here before as old Indian trails, like Archer. And Elston. Clark, it just kind of runs along the ridge, which is also why there's so many cemeteries along it. Anita, that's usually more recent than I'll go. Carol, I'm not sure. It's usually the families who are involved in this. I'm not sure what the details were here. Yeah, I kind of assumed when I first heard that a lot of the angled road for Indian trails, that does sound like BS. It sounds like the thing is going to turn out to be BS. But in large part, it's true. Amy, see you there. Dina, nope, not a thing. I don't have a thing planned. I mean, I imagine I'll do a morning mini tour. .135 states. That's tricky. They might have just left off the north and south, or it's also probably, depending on what year it was, things got renumbered eventually. Jackie, yeah, Miles stopped climbing up my butt after the beginning. Well, let me go find him.
And down the groove now, we rather imagine you'll hear that famous 7 brass of Earl Hines in Bambino.
Miles. There you are. You might have seen that. I called his name and he came out from behind a curtain. Girl, yeah, 1908 is before they renamed everything. Renumbered stuff. The Loop, I think, well, most of it was 1909. The Loop was a little bit later. Aviva, good plan. Ooh. See all the people saying hi to you, Miles? I know, you can't read. That's a fluffy cat. Now, Jack, he didn't try to hide as soon as I called his name, he came right out. Staring down at his toy box and meowing. See you, Kristen. Okay, down you go. Want to say something? Carol, yes, Miles was very good as soon as we brought him home.
But here's rhythm and time. Earl Father Hines and the St. Louis Blues.
Well, Miles, what do you want to chase now? Gosh, how about Snowman Toy? He's waiting for me to get the cat dancer out, I know it. Hey, Linda, welcome even if you're late. Yeah, Miles was great when we met him in the shelter, and he was good when we brought him home. And Charlotte was kind of indifferent to him. She was always kind of indifferent to him, but they played a lot. Well, here we go, Miles. Dangly toy will do it. But yeah, there'll be another cat here within the next couple of months, but not right away. Happy birthday to Skylar, Ava. Oh no, it's not her birthday. I read that wrong. But say hi to Skylar, Ava. Whoa. Know how you guys can see him over here. He's jumping. Here. Show how you can jump, Miles. He's been practicing his jumping. But all right, everybody, I think he wants the attention, so I'm going to go ahead and quickly plug the upcoming tours one more time. Thursday night, the 1864 Chicago Insurrection. Then Saturday, some tickets are still available for the Rosehill Cemetery tour in person. Just go to mysteriouschicago.com. Then next Sunday, we'll kind of supplement the last couple of in-person tours with some of the stuff that I can't really show because it's just too far of a walk. There's a lot of that going around. And of course, we have morning mini tours every day. Tomorrow, we are back to Mural Monday. Seems like we were just at Mural Monday. But all right, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours, saying stay safe, stay strong, stay dry, stay on Earth, and if you can, of course, stay spooky. Have a great day, everybody.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a program.
Say bye-bye, Miles.